I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I'm going to look at the Disinformation Governance Board of Homeland Security and how it turns facts and logic into domestic terrorism and turns its own arbitrary authority into a power that can overrule presidents and Congress. Its new executive director, Nina Jankowicz, has conveniently for us put her philosophy into a jaunty little ditty. And that's good because it's the only place we're going to find out how she defines disinformation and gives examples. We'll be analyzing those according to the ancient rules of how you discern when someone is trying to, in her words, hide a little, hide a little, hide a little lie. Those would come from the home of democracy, ancient Greece, and they were called rhetorical fallacies. We'll end by looking at other rules that go back to before World War I and were developed as 10 principles of war propaganda. But first, I want to begin by looking at the heart of what reason is by explaining logic. Let's get started. Logic is your friend. Data can be suppressed or manipulated, but logic is the rules for organized thinking or discourse. It's something that has to be applied consistently to all sides, or it's not logical. So ethics and logic and consistency are all synonymous. The only way that you can push back against injustice is by pointing out the inconsistency in a rules application. That's the sole job of a lawyer. The opposite of rule by logic or rule by law is rule by arbitrary authority or dictatorship. Now, every word that gets used in a law has to be defined, and there's rules for good definitions. It can't repeat the same word or any form of that word in the definition. It needs to not use proper nouns. It has to define any term used in the definition that's ambiguous. There needs to be a criteria by which something can be decided whether that term applies or not. And if it's a word that's going to take away freedoms or possessions or even life, it has to have a way to challenge it in some kind of court of law. If we allow de facto laws to stand that can take away the rights of expression, of association, and of monetary exchange with no legislative or judicial process that they've ever gone through, we don't live in any kind of a democracy. Let's look at words themselves. A noun is an action of aggregating a set of things according to some common denominator. So something like disinformation has to have a set of rules that distinguishes it. When Confucius was asked what the first thing he would do if he was the ruler, he said, fix words. What that means is you give them a definition that doesn't change, which would be the opposite of Humpty Dumpty in Alice in Wonderland, who said, when I use a word, it means whatever I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. To which Alice replied, the question is, can you make a word mean so many different things? To which he replied, the real question is, which is to be master? So Humpty Dumpty uses a rhetorical trick there because he gives the words themselves agency and says, I am the master of the words. And by doing that, he makes himself master of the argument, master over Alice, because whoever defines the question wins the debate. So if you can master the words, you are pulling something over on people because those words have power. And if you have the power to define them arbitrarily, depending on who they apply to, then you have the power over those people. This is what Nina Jankowicz is doing by being the new Humpty Dumpty word czar and deciding what words can live or die online. And this isn't an idle threat because we only exist as a community by communication. So we're not the United States or any other group if we can't communicate. It's like saying that someone can continue to be a worker bee, but cuts them off at the neck so that they can no longer speak or think. It's like the Red Queen said, off with their heads. So let's examine what Nina means by disinformation by looking at her little disinfo ditty. And I will not be singing this. Information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious. By saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet so, disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. So what she's looking at there is information laundering. If you look at money laundering, it's taking something from an illegal source and putting it through a legitimate business. So that makes the origin of this something that is what makes it wrong. There's no rules by which something is a lie. Something is a lie based on its origins, based on whether it's authorized. And then she's saying that the ways that these get laundered is by saying them in Congress. So Congress doesn't have the power to actually discern whether something's truthful or a lie. They need Nina to do this for them. And then she says, looking at mainstream outlets. So this would be newspapers, journals, radio, television, anywhere that we as consumers of information have chosen to get our news. We no longer have the right to be able to validate that by saying, here are the people that we trust to be telling us the truth. We have to make sure that she is telling us what the truth is because we can't tell for ourselves. Then Nina goes into the chorus of It's How You hide a little lie. Apparently to Nina, the way to hide a lie is by publicizing it. You publish it on somewhere like the internet, where anyone has the ability to contradict what you're saying and show why there are facts or logic that make it not true. But that's to her where you're actually hiding it. Now let's look at the example she gives in her song. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can't cause pain, they're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. One of the rhetorical tricks cataloged by the Greeks was the straw man argument. And that is what COVID doesn't cause pain is. I don't know anyone who's arguing that. But when I followed the shared bad intel link, it took me to Newsweek. And that had a sidebar that had another example of a straw man argument. It had a debate that was Nick Gillespie saying COVID-19 is over for the vaccinated versus Tanzina Vega, who was saying, should we show empathy for those still vulnerable to COVID-19? That's not a true debate. If you wanted to have the other side of the debate from Nick, you could have Dr. Madhava Sethi, who has an article this week on did the Moderna trial data predict the pandemic of the vaccinated? And he shows that that data actually represented that there was a decline in antibodies for those who were vaccinated and boosted in the trial. Did they already know? And then there's a lot of data coming out with the Pfizer 80,000 page release. And that's showing that there's a lot of patients who are missing from that, the vast majority of them, and that the data on the ones that show are not the data that has been represented. And then we have UK. The UK has shown that the vaccinated are coming down with COVID more frequently than those who are unvaccinated. And then a Danish study has come out, which is peer-reviewed, and that's showing that the ability of the boosters wanes within a few weeks. So let's look at that bad intel. This links back to a 2019 December article where Rudy Giuliani, in his capacity as Trump's lawyer, said that he had discovered through hundreds of hours of research documents and witnesses that showed that absolutely there was so much corruption that was going on in Ukraine between the U.S. that went beyond the Bidens, that the president was obligated. It was his duty to ask for an investigation. There was extortion, bribery, and money laundering. Now, in retrospect, when we look at those claims, they are such an understatement of what was actually happening that we know now. If anything, Hunter Biden's laptop is the poster child for disinformation, because we absolutely know that that was true and that it did have evidence on it that these things were going on. So in some future retrospective, if this does cause World War III or some kind of nuclear attack, how are we going to look back and say, we should have impeached the guy that could have exposed that corruption sooner? Jumping on the disinformation bandwagon, The Atlantic held a conference with the University of Chicago featuring Obama on disinformation and the erosion of democracy. One of the people there was a college freshman who wrote for the paper, which was called The Chicago Thinker. And he asked, in 2020 you wrote, those who live outside the Fox News bubble do not, of course, need to learn any of the stuff about Hunter Biden, referring to his laptop, of course. A poll later found that if voters knew about the contents of the laptop, 16% of Joe Biden voters would have acted differently. Now, of course, we know a few weeks ago that the New York Times confirmed that the content is real. Do you think the media acted inappropriately when they instantly dismissed Hunter Biden's laptop as Russian disinformation, and what can be learned from that in ensuring that what we label as disinformation is truly disinformation and not reality? Anne Applebaum, a writer for The Atlantic, answered with another rhetorical trick when she said, well, I don't think the question is whether it was disinformation. The question is, was it news? Should it really matter what someone's son does, and does that relate to the presidency? So I just don't think it's very interesting. But while Anne may think that the laptop wasn't news, the story of the laptop's non-existence was nonstop news everywhere. Another student named 5 different false narratives that were promoted by CNN, things now known to be false, and said, is it time to admit that the canon of journalistic ethics is dead or no longer operative? When both of these challenges went viral, Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief for The Atlantic, answered, I think one darkly humorous but inevitable measurement of our success is that our disinformation conference has been the subject of disinformation campaigns on social media already. To which the college thinker retorted, and just like that, @Jeffrey Goldberg proved our point. First rule in the corporate media playbook: dismiss truthful reporting as disinformation to avoid accountability. A fitting end to the conference. And to close and bring this a little more into a historical perspective, I'd like to quote 10 principles of war propaganda. These were translated into English by Nikta on Daily Cause in 2009. In 2001, before 9/11, Belgian historian Anne Morelli published a book analyzing the basic principles of war propaganda. Unfortunately, and as far as I can tell, it was never translated to English, only in German. She credits the work of Lord Ponsonby, an amazingly and unfortunately somewhat forgotten character. He stood largely alone in the Commons opposing World War I before it started, predicting not just the massacre it was going to be, but more interestingly for our purpose, how it was going to be sold to the masses. Morelli enumerates the following principles. 1. We don't want war. We're only defending ourselves. 2. The other guy is solely responsible for the war. 3. Our adversary's leader is evil and looks evil. 4. We are defending a noble purpose, not special interest. 5. The enemy is purposefully causing atrocities. We only commit mistakes. 6. The enemy is using unlawful weapons. 7. We have very few losses. Our enemy is losing big. 8. Intellectuals and artists support our cause, including Bono. 9. Our cause is sacred. 10. Those who doubt our propaganda are traitors. And we could add 11. Any facts or logic that contradict our propaganda is disinformation. If you want to delve more deeply, here's the reality puzzle and the propaganda playbook, and here's one called Are We Being Manipulated? And I love my subscribers and my commenters, and my Substack is giving a place where deep conversations can go on. As Jack Sirius posted on my Yuval Harari, if 140 people posted 5 paragraphs in response to my videos, he thinks that we would change the world. Let's test that out. Thank you.